Captain Jake Murphy was drinking his morning coffee when the universe decided to get interesting. The deep space mining vessel New Frontier floated peacefully near Neptune, its crew busy extracting rare metals from asteroids. It was supposed to be another boring Tuesday in the outer solar system. Then the sensors started screaming. "Captain, you need to see this," called out Lisa Brooks from the communications station. Her voice was calm, professional, like she was reporting a minor equipment malfunction instead of something that would change human history forever. Jake walked over, coffee mug still in hand. The main screen showed energy readings that made no sense. Whatever was coming toward them was massive, moving faster than anything humans had ever built, and it was slowing down right in their neighborhood. "How big are we talking?" Jake asked. "About the size of Manhattan, sir. Maybe bigger." The space around Neptune suddenly filled with light. When it cleared, a fleet of crystalline ships hung in the void like floating cities. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, covered in what looked like weapons that could probably turn planets into dust. Jake took another sip of coffee. "Well, that's new." The largest ship moved closer. Lisa's equipment picked up an incoming transmission. "They're trying to talk to us, Captain." "Put them on screen." The view screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at something that definitely wasn't human. The alien had 4 arms, skin that looked like polished metal, and eyes that glowed with their own light. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English, which was either very convenient or very scary. "Primitive beings of the 3rd planet," the alien said in a voice that sounded like thunder. "I am Fleet Commander Vex Thul of the Zeltharian hegemony. Your species has been selected for integration into our glorious empire. You will submit to our authority or face complete annihilation." Jake looked at Lisa. Lisa looked at Jake. Neither of them seemed particularly worried about the complete annihilation part. "Did he just threaten to blow up Earth?" asked Danny Clark, the ship's engineer, from his workstation. "I think so," Jake replied. He turned back to the screen. "Commander Vex Thul, this is Captain Jake Murphy of the human vessel New Frontier. Thanks for stopping by. Give us a minute to call this in, would you?" The alien's 4 arms moved in what might have been confusion. "You wish to call this in?" "Standard procedure for first contact situations. Lisa, get me Earth Command." Lisa nodded and started working her console. "Earth Command, this is New Frontier. We have a first contact situation out here. Alien fleet, about 50 ships. They're talking about integration and annihilation. Please, advise." On the main screen, Commander Vex Thul's glowing eyes got brighter. "You dare to ignore our ultimatum?" "Not ignoring it," Jake said pleasantly. "Just following proper channels. These things take time, you know. Paperwork, approvals, that sort of thing." The alien fleet waited, and waited, and waited some more. 3 hours later, Earth Command finally got back to them. "New Frontier, this is Admiral Beth Connor. We've reviewed your situation report. Are the aliens still there?" "Still here, Admiral. They seem patient." "Good. We're sending up a diplomatic team. In the meantime, see if you can get some technical specifications on their ships. Danny's probably curious about their propulsion systems." Danny perked up at his station. "Actually, I've been scanning them this whole time. Their energy signatures are fascinating. I think they're using some kind of crystalline matrix for power distribution. Very inefficient, though. I can see at least 3 ways to improve it." Commander Vex Thul had been listening to this entire conversation with growing bewilderment. You are analyzing our technology?" "Just the basics," Danny said. "Don't worry, we're not trying to steal anything. I'm just naturally curious about how things work. Your ships are really impressive, by the way. Whoever designed them was brilliant, even if they did miss some obvious improvements." "Improvements?" The alien's voice hit a pitch that probably shouldn't have been possible. "Oh, sure. Your power routing could be 30% more efficient with better crystal alignment, and your weapon placement creates some serious blind spots that any decent pilot could exploit. But don't feel bad about it. Nobody gets everything right on the first try." Jake watched the alien commander's face go through several different colors. "Commander Vex Thul, while we're waiting for our diplomatic team, would you like some coffee? We've got plenty." "Coffee? Hot beverage? Very popular on our planet. Helps people think clearly during long negotiations. Negotiations? Vexthal's forearms waved in agitation. This is not a negotiation, this is a demand for surrender. Well, yes, but everything's negotiable if you think about it. Your empire wants something, we want something, so we figure out a deal that works for everyone. Basic diplomacy, really. Lisa looked up from her console. Captain, I'm getting reports from all over the system. More ships are arriving, but they're keeping their distance. Looks like word is spreading. Good. The more the merrier. Jake turned back to the screen. Commander, it looks like this is going to take a while. Are you sure you don't want that coffee? We could talk about your empire while we wait. Sounds like you've got quite an operation going. Vexthul stared at him for a long moment. In all his years of conquest and all the worlds he had brought under Zeltharian rule, nothing like this had ever happened. Usually there was screaming, sometimes begging, occasionally desperate last stands that ended in glorious destruction. But coffee? Casual conversation about power efficiency? Treating the mighty Zeltharian hegemony like some kind of business partner? You are not afraid, Vexthul said, and for the first time, his voice sounded uncertain. Jake shrugged. Should we be? I mean, you seem reasonable enough. A little. Dramatic with the whole annihilation thing, but we've dealt with difficult customers before. Lisa, is that diplomatic team on the way? ETA 6 hours, Captain. They're bringing the full first contact package. Excellent. Commander Vexthul, looks like you'll be meeting with our professional diplomats soon. They're much better at this sort of thing than we are. In the meantime, feel free to look around the solar system. Just try not to scare the tourists. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge of the new frontier quiet, except for the hum of machinery. Danny was already deep into analyzing the alien ship's technical specifications, muttering to himself about crystalline matrices and energy flow patterns. Lisa updated their status report to Earth Command, treating it like any other routine communication. And Jake Murphy, the first human to receive an ultimatum from a galactic empire, finished his coffee and wondered what was taking the cafeteria so long with lunch. The United Nations headquarters in Geneva had seen many historic meetings, but never one quite like this. Ambassador Susan Rodriguez checked her watch, straightened her jacket, and walked into conference room A with the same professional calm she brought to every international crisis. The room had been prepared according to standard diplomatic protocol. Fresh coffee, assorted pastries, bottled water, and a large screen for presentations. The only unusual detail was the specially reinforced chairs designed to accommodate visitors with 4 arms. Good morning, Susan said, as the Zeltharian delegation entered. Welcome to Earth. I'm Ambassador Rodriguez, and I'll be your primary contact during these discussions. Imperial diplomat Cassandra stood nearly 8 feet tall, her metallic skin gleaming under the conference room lights. Behind her came 3 advisors and what appeared to be a military attaché. They moved with the fluid grace of beings accustomed to being the most powerful people in any room. Ambassador Rodriguez, Cassandra said, her voice carrying the authority of an empire that controlled 12 star systems. We appreciate your hospitality. However, I must remind you that this is not a negotiation. We are here to accept your surrender and discuss the terms of your integration into the hegemony. Susan smiled politely and gestured toward the chairs. Of course, please make yourselves comfortable. Coffee? We have regular and decaf. I wasn't sure about alien dietary restrictions, so we also have tea, juice, and sparkling water. Cassandra's 4 eyes blinked in sequence. You are offering us refreshments? Standard protocol for international meetings. We find that discussions go much smoother when everyone's comfortable. Susan poured herself a cup of coffee and sat down. Now, I've reviewed the preliminary information from Captain Murphy's encounter with Fleet Commander Vexthul. Very impressive fleet, by the way. Your technology must have taken centuries to develop. Millennia, corrected the military attaché. Even more impressive. I have to say, your timing is interesting. We've been expecting first contact for decades, so this isn't quite the surprise it might have been a century ago. Cassandra slowly lowered herself into one of the reinforced chairs. You Expected us? Well, not you specifically, but alien contact in general. We've been preparing protocols since the 1960s. Actually, let me get Danny Clark in here. He's been dying to meet you. Before the aliens could respond, Susan pressed a button on her tablet. Moments later, a young man in jeans and a NASA t-shirt burst through the door carrying a tablet and practically vibrating with excitement. "Oh wow, you're really here," Danny said, looking at the aliens like a kid seeing Disneyland for the first time. "This is amazing. I've been going over your ship, schematics all night. The crystalline power matrix is brilliant, but I think there might be some resonance issues in the tertiary coupling arrays." He plopped down in a chair and started swiping through displays on his tablet. "See, if you adjust the harmonic frequency by about 12% and realign the crystal lattice structure, you could probably boost power efficiency by 30%, maybe more." Cassandra stared at him. "You have been studying our technology?" "Just the basics from the sensor, scans. Don't worry, I'm not trying to steal anything, I'm just curious how everything works." Danny looked up from his tablet. "Oh, and I posted some of my analysis on our engineering forums. The response has been incredible. Professor Martinez at MIT thinks your faster-than-light communication system could revolutionize quantum mechanics. Dr. Kim in Seoul has some ideas about improving your hull materials. The whole scientific community is buzzing. You shared our technology, publicly?" "Just the theoretical stuff. We always share scientific discoveries. That's how progress works." Danny turned to Susan. "Speaking of which, I've got about 50 colleagues who would love to meet with their engineering teams. And the physics department at CERN is practically begging for a collaboration on their propulsion systems." Susan nodded and made a note on her tablet. "We'll add that to the agenda. Now, Diplomat Cassandra, shall we discuss the terms of this integration you mentioned?" Cassandra's metallic skin had shifted to a slightly different color. "The terms are simple. You submit to imperial authority. We provide technological advancement and protection from hostile species. Your world becomes part of the hegemony." "I see." Susan pulled up a document on the large screen. "I've prepared some questions about the specifics. First, what's the tax structure for member worlds? Are we looking at a flat rate or progressive taxation? And how does trade regulation work across different systems?" "Tax structure? Well, yes. If we're joining a galactic government, we need to understand the financial obligations. Also, I'll need information about your legal system, civil rights protections, environmental regulations, and labor laws." Danny looked up from his tablet. "Oh, and what about intellectual property rights? Because I've already got 17 patent applications based on your technology, and I want to make sure everything's above board." The Ziltharian advisors whispered among themselves in their own language. Cassandra's 4 eyes were blinking rapidly. "Ambassador Rodriguez," she said slowly, "perhaps there has been a misunderstanding. We are not offering membership in a democracy. The hegemony is an empire. Worlds that join us do so because they have been conquered." "Right, but even conquered territories have administrative structures," Susan replied reasonably. "Are we talking about direct imperial rule or some kind of autonomous status? Will Earth get representation in your government? And what happens to our existing treaties with other Earth nations?" "Existing treaties? Oh yes, that's going to be complicated. We have 193 member nations in the UN alone, plus various trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, environmental accords. Any major political change like this requires approval from individual governments. We'll need to schedule referendums, probably some congressional hearings." Susan pulled up another document. "I've drafted a preliminary timeline, but realistically, we're looking at 18 to 24 months minimum for full implementation. That's assuming no major legal challenges." Danny raised his hand. "Also, I should mention that I've been in contact with some of your subject species." The room went very quiet. "You've been what?" Cassandra's voice had dropped to a whisper. "Well, your communication frequencies aren't encrypted, so I was able to establish contact with a few other civilizations in your empire. Really nice people. The Corvani have some fascinating biotechnology, and the Gent have made incredible advances in environmental engineering." Danny scrolled through his tablet. Actually, they've been asking a lot of questions about human democracy and economic systems. The Corvani are particularly interested in our concept of labor unions. Apparently, worker rights aren't really a thing in the hegemony. Susan made another note. That's definitely something we'll need to address. Earth has very strict standards regarding worker protections and civil liberties. Cassandra stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is not how conquests work. Well, no, probably not, Susan agreed. But it's how international relations work. We're happy to discuss joining your empire, but we need to make sure it's beneficial for everyone involved. It's basically like any other international agreement. We could simply destroy your world. Susan nodded thoughtfully. You could, but that seems inefficient. Then you'd have to deal with refugee populations, environmental cleanup, economic disruption. Much easier to work out a peaceful arrangement. Danny looked up from his tablet again. Plus, you'd lose access to all our technological innovations. I've already got ideas for improving your weapon systems, but I'm not sharing those with anyone who threatens Earth. Cassandra looked around the room at the coffee cups. The casual attitude, the humans treating her galactic empire like a mid-level regional government with interesting technology and questionable management practices. For the first time in her career, Imperial diplomat Cassandra began to suspect that the Zeltharian hegemony might have bitten off more than it could chew. 3 weeks into what was supposed to be a conquest, the Zeltharian hegemony found itself running the galaxy's most awkward cultural exchange program. Colonel Rick Santos stood on the observation deck of the Zeltharian flagship, watching Earth turn slowly below them. Beside him, Fleet Commander Vexthul was experiencing what humans might call an existential crisis. Your species is very strange, Vexthul said for the 100th time that week. So we've been told, Rick replied, checking his tablet for the day's schedule. Looks like Dr. Foster wants to show your science team the Amazon rainforest this afternoon. Something about biodiversity comparison studies. Down on Earth, Dr. Amy Foster was indeed preparing for another field trip. The Zeltharian scientists had been fascinated by Earth's biological diversity, mainly because most planets in the hegemony had been strip-mined to the point where complex ecosystems no longer existed. The key to understanding Earth's biosphere, Amy explained to her alien audience, is that we learn to work with natural systems instead of just exploiting them. Mostly anyway. We made some mistakes along the way. The lead Zeltharian scientist, a being called Morthek, examined a butterfly through a magnifying glass. This creature serves no industrial purpose. That's not really the point, Amy said patiently. Beauty has value in itself. Plus, butterflies are pollinators. They help plants reproduce, which maintains the ecosystem, which provides resources we need. It's all connected. While she talked, Amy was casually taking readings from the Zeltharian portable scanners they'd brought along. Every piece of alien technology that visited Earth somehow ended up being studied by human scientists who were just naturally curious about how things worked. Back in space, pilot Steve Johnson was taking his third joyride in a Zeltharian scout ship. The alien who was supposed to be supervising him had given up trying to stop him and was now taking notes on Steve's piloting techniques. You're flying it wrong, Steve said, pulling the ship through a maneuver that should have been impossible. The way you're managing power distribution, you're only using about 60% of the engine's potential. Those are the safety parameters, protested the alien pilot, whose name was apparently unpronounceable in human languages. Safety parameters are for people who don't know what they're doing, Steve replied cheerfully, spinning the ship around. A communications satellite just for fun. Watch this. He redirected power from non-essential systems, adjusted the engine harmonics, and suddenly the scout ship was moving twice as fast as its specifications said it should. How did you do that? The alien asked. Basic physics. Your people designed these ships to be foolproof, but that means they're also not optimized for performance. It's like buying a sports car and never going over 30 miles per hour. Down. On Earth, the cultural exchange was getting even more interesting. The Zeltharian diplomatic team had requested a tour of human military facilities, expecting to see primitive weapons and basic defenses. Instead, Colonel Santos had taken them to the Pentagon, where they sat in on a routine strategic planning meeting. So the key to modern warfare, explained General Patricia Lopez, is not having to fight at all. We spend most of our time on logistics, intelligence, and diplomacy. Actual combat is usually a sign that somebody messed up earlier in the process. Imperial war leader Gextor, who had conquered 17 worlds in personal combat, listened, in growing confusion as the humans discussed supply chains, psychological operations, and economic warfare. You do not train your warriors for glorious battle? We train them to win, General Lopez replied. Glory is nice, but victory is better. And the best victory is one where nobody has to die. She pulled up a presentation on the main screen. For example, your empire controls the Corvani through military occupation, right? That requires constant patrols, garrison forces, administrative oversight, very expensive. The cost of empire, Gextor agreed. But what if the Corvani wanted to be part of your empire? Then you wouldn't need all those occupation forces. They'd police themselves, pay taxes voluntarily, maybe even contribute their own ships to your fleet. Gextor's four arms moved in. Agitation. They would never willingly join us. Well, no, not the way things are now. But what if you offered them something they wanted? Better technology, trade opportunities, protection from enemies. Make membership in the empire profitable instead of oppressive. General Lopez brought up another slide. We've been doing some analysis of your administrative costs. Right now, you're spending about 40% of your resources just maintaining control over your subject worlds. With some basic policy changes, you could cut that to maybe 5% and use the savings for expansion or research. While this conversation was happening, Dr. Kate Miller was putting the finishing touches on a paper that would soon be published in every major academic journal on Earth. Her analysis of Zeltharian society had identified dozens of inefficiencies in their imperial structure. The problem with conquest-based expansion, she explained to her research team, is that it doesn't scale well. Every new world you conquer requires more resources to control, which means you need to conquer more worlds to pay for the first ones. It's a pyramid scheme with starships. Her proposed solutions included democratic representation for subject worlds, economic incentives for cooperation, and cultural exchange programs to reduce resistance to imperial rule. Within hours of publication, her paper had been translated into 17 alien languages and was spreading across the galactic internet faster than the hegemony's censors could stop it. On the Zeltharian flagship, Fleet Commander Vexthul was reading the same paper on his personal communicator. Around him, his officers were engaged in heated discussions about human military doctrine, economic theory, and something called soft power projection. Sir, reported his communications officer, we're receiving messages from Corvani, Gent, and Velthar representatives. They want to meet with the humans. Meet with the humans? Why? They say the humans have proposed new models for interspecies. Cooperation. The Corvani leadership is particularly interested in something called Federation membership instead of imperial subjugation. Vexthul's four eyes closed in what humans might recognize as a headache. And what are the humans saying about these requests? Ambassador Rodriguez says they're happy to facilitate discussions between all interested parties. She's proposed something called a Galactic Peace Conference to be held on Earth next month. Katuntuk. On the planet's surface, Colonel Santos was wrapping up another day of cultural exchange. The Zeltharian military observers had spent the afternoon watching human soldiers conduct disaster relief operations, humanitarian aid distribution, and peacekeeping exercises. Your warriors spend much time helping civilians, observed war leader Gextor. That's most of what modern military forces do, Rick explained. Fighting is actually a pretty small part of the job. We spend more time building schools than blowing things up. This seems inefficient. Depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If your goal is to maintain order and security, it's very efficient. Happy populations don't rebel. People who trust their government don't need to be controlled by force. Rick checked his watch. Speaking of which, we've got a dinner meeting with some of the other alien representatives. Dr. Foster set it up. Apparently, they want to compare notes on human proposals for imperial reform. As they walked toward the mess hall, Gextor asked the question that had been bothering him all day. "Colonel Santos, are you trying to destroy our empire?" Rick considered this seriously. "No, we're trying to improve it. Big difference. And if we refuse your improvements? Then you refuse them. It's not like we're going to invade you or anything, we're just offering suggestions." Gextor stopped walking. "You would not invade us? Why would we? We're not conquerors. We're problem solvers. Your empire has problems, we have solutions. If you don't want our help, that's your choice." For the first time since arriving at Earth, war leader Gextor began to understand why the Zeltharian hegemony was in trouble. They had come, expecting to face an enemy, and instead found consultants. Supreme Overlord Thexmarin had ruled the Zeltharian hegemony for 3 centuries. In that time, he had conquered 47 worlds, crushed dozens of rebellions, and built an empire that spanned 12 star systems. He was not accustomed to being embarrassed by primitive aliens who treated his authority like a customer service complaint. The emergency session of the High Command was taking place on the imperial capital world of Zelth Prime. Around the crystal conference table sat the most powerful beings in known space, and they were all very unhappy. "Explain to me," Thexmarin said, his voice carrying the cold authority of absolute power, "how a single planet of primitives has managed to turn our conquest into a diplomatic disaster." Admiral Kolthes, commander of the Imperial Navy, consulted his tactical display. "The humans have established unauthorized contact with 17 of our subject species. They're sharing technological improvements, political theories, and something they call human rights documentation. And our response? We've tried to block their communications, but their signal encryption is surprisingly sophisticated. They appear to have reverse-engineered our quantum communication protocols and improved them." War Minister Vexandra leaned forward. "More concerning, Supreme Overlord, is that several subject worlds are requesting direct negotiations with human representatives. The Corvani have formally petitioned for what they call Federation status instead of imperial occupation." Thexmarin's 4 arms clenched into fists. "Send the 7th Battle Fleet to Earth. Make an example of these humans. Show the galaxy what happens when primitives challenge the hegemony." 3 days later, the largest military force in Zeltharian history assembled in Earth's solar system. 500 ships, each capable of destroying continents, arranged themselves in perfect battle formation around the small blue planet. Admiral Kolthes opened a communication channel to Earth, expecting to deliver humanity's final ultimatum. Instead, he found himself talking to a cheerful human who introduced himself as Captain Tony Walker. "Admiral Kolthes, great to meet you. I'm Captain Walker, freelance merchant and cultural liaison. Welcome to the solar system. I have to say, that's an impressive fleet you've got there." "Captain Walker," Kolthes said slowly, "you are addressing the supreme fleet of the Zeltharian hegemony. You will surrender immediately or face annihilation." "Right about that," Tony said, somehow managing to sound both respectful and completely unconcerned. "I've been talking to some of your subject species, and they've got some interesting perspectives on the whole imperial expansion thing." Before the Admiral could respond, several more ships appeared on the tactical display. They weren't human vessels. They were Corvani, Gent, and Velthar ships, species that were supposed to be under Zeltharian control. "What is the meaning of this?" Kolthes demanded. A new voice joined the communication channel. "Admiral, this is Captain Morvan of the Corvani Trade Council. We're here for the negotiations." "What negotiations? You are subjects of the Empire." "Actually," Tony interjected, "that's kind of what we wanted to talk about. See, I've been running some numbers on imperial efficiency, and I think there might be some opportunities for improvement." Back on Earth, Dr. Kate Miller was putting the finishing touches on her latest research paper. This one analyzed the economic costs of maintaining an authoritarian empire versus the benefits of voluntary Federation membership. "The data is pretty clear," she explained to her research team via video conference. "The hegemony is spending about 60% of its total resources just keeping their subject worlds under control. Meanwhile, trade between willing partners typically generates economic growth of 20 to 30% annually." Her assistant, Dr. Ryan Chang, pulled up a comparison chart. What's really interesting is that the most prosperous worlds in the hegemony are the ones with the most autonomy. The heavily occupied planets are actually economic drains on the system. Right. So if you're supreme overlord, what's his name? You've got two choices. Keep spending enormous amounts maintaining military control over unhappy subjects, or switch to a voluntary federation model and watch your total wealth increase dramatically. Kate's paper was already being distributed across the galactic internet, translated into dozens of languages. More importantly, it was being read by politicians, economists, and military leaders throughout the hegemony. In space, Captain Tony Walker was still talking to Admiral Colthes, who was discovering that threatening annihilation was much less effective when the people you were threatening seemed genuinely interested in finding mutually beneficial solutions. The thing is, Admiral, Tony was saying, your empire has incredible technology and fantastic organizational capabilities, but you're using them inefficiently. It's like having a high-performance engine and only running it in first gear. You dare to lecture me on efficiency? Not lecturing, just sharing some observations. For example, the Corvani here have biotechnology that could revolutionize agriculture throughout the hegemony. The Gent have developed environmental restoration, techniques that could terraform dead worlds in decades instead of centuries. But because they're occupied subjects instead of willing partners, that knowledge isn't being shared. Captain Morvan of the Corvani spoke up. The humans have shown us economic models where voluntary cooperation produces better results than forced compliance. We would like to discuss transitioning from occupied territory to Federation membership. Admiral Colthes felt something he hadn't experienced in decades: uncertainty. You would voluntarily remain part of the hegemony? If the terms were acceptable, yes, we want the protection and trade benefits of Imperial membership. We just don't want to be enslaved for the privilege. On Zelth Prime, Supreme Overlord Thexmarin was receiving increasingly confused reports from his military commanders. The humans weren't fighting back, but they weren't surrendering either. Instead, they seemed to be conducting some kind of massive diplomatic intervention. Sir, reported Intelligence Minister Vorthak, we've intercepted communications between human representatives and leadership from 7 different subject worlds. They're discussing something called a constitutional convention to restructure imperial governance. A what? Apparently, it's a human political concept where stakeholders meet to negotiate a governmental framework that benefits all parties. The humans are suggesting that the hegemony could maintain its territorial extent and economic benefits while reducing military expenditure through voluntary cooperation. Thexmarin stared at the intelligence report. They want to restructure our government? More accurately, sir, they want to help us optimize it. War Minister Vexandra consulted her own reports. Supreme Overlord, I must inform you that military morale is complicated. Our officers have been reading human military doctrine, and many are requesting implementation of what they call efficiency reforms to reduce operational costs. Our own military is reading human propaganda? It's not propaganda, sir. It's peer-reviewed research published in academic journals, very thorough analysis of resource allocation, strategic planning, and organizational management. On the communications screen, Admiral Colthes was still trying to conduct a proper military confrontation, while Captain Tony Walker treated the entire situation like a business meeting with slightly exotic clients. Admiral, I completely understand your position, Tony was saying. You've got orders to bring us into line and you need to show results. But what if we could give you better results than a traditional conquest? What do you mean? Well, conquest gives you one subjugated world with ongoing occupation costs, but partnership gives you access to our entire technological and economic base, plus whatever innovations we develop in the future. Which option provides better long-term value for the hegemony? Admiral Colthes found himself actually considering the question, which was probably the most disturbing thing that had happened to him all day. Back on Earth, Ambassador Susan Rodriguez was organizing the galaxy's first interspecies constitutional convention, while Dr. Kate Miller's economic analysis was causing civil unrest on 3 different imperial worlds. The Zeltharian hegemony had come to conquer Earth, and instead found themselves being given a free consultation on Imperial management optimization. And the most terrifying part, from the Supreme Overlord's perspective, was that the human suggestions were actually making sense. 6 months after the Zeltharian hegemony's invasion of Earth, the galaxy looked very different. The changes had started small, efficiency improvements here, policy adjustments there, but had snowballed into something unprecedented in galactic history. Admiral Beth Connor stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion, reviewing the morning reports with the same professional competence she'd once brought to managing Earth's Pacific Fleet. The ship's former commander, Admiral Colthes, stood beside her as Strategic Operations Advisor, a position that hadn't existed 6 months ago but had quickly become essential. Fleet efficiency is up 37%, Beth reported, scrolling through her tablet. Response times improved by 42%, and operational costs down by nearly 50%. The new command structure is working better than projected. Colthes, who had once commanded through fear and absolute authority, now found himself genuinely impressed by human organizational methods. The crew morale surveys continue to show improvement. I admit I was skeptical about this chain of command optimization concept. It's not complicated, Beth replied. People work better when they understand their role and feel like their contributions matter. Fear motivates for a while, but competence and respect work better long-term. Down in the engineering section, Pete Rodriguez was having the time of his life. The former automotive engineer from Detroit had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer of the entire Hegemony fleet after his weekend projects had revolutionized faster-than-light travel. The beautiful thing about Zeltharian technology, Pete explained to his mixed human-alien engineering team, is that it's incredibly advanced but completely unoptimized. It's like they built a Formula One race car and then never bothered to tune the engine. His latest modification had increased FTL efficiency by 200% while reducing power consumption by half. The improvement was so dramatic that other species were voluntarily requesting to upgrade their ships with human-enhanced Zeltharian technology. Pete called out his assistant, a young Corvani engineer named Thrilva. We're getting reports from the Outer Rim territories. 3 more species want to join the Alliance. The Zeltharian-Human Alliance had been formed after the Constitutional Convention on Earth. What had started as the Zeltharian hegemony's invasion force had somehow become a voluntary interspecies federation with Earth as a founding member and humans holding a suspiciously large number of key administrative positions. Former Supreme Overlord Thexmarin, who now held the title of Cultural Ambassador, was still adjusting to his new role. He stood in the Alliance Council chambers on Luna, watching human efficiency experts conduct a presentation on sustainable imperial growth through voluntary partnership. The presentation was being given by Dr. Kate Miller, whose economic analysis had sparked civil reform movements across half the galaxy. She stood at the podium with the same calm confidence she'd shown when publishing academic papers, except now her audience included representatives from dozens of star systems. The key insight, Kate explained, is that expansion through partnership generates exponential growth, while expansion through conquest creates linear costs. The mathematics are straightforward. She clicked to the next slide, showing economic projections for the next century. Under the old system, the hegemony would have controlled maybe 20 systems by now, spending enormous resources maintaining military occupation. Under the Alliance model, we're projecting voluntary membership from over 100 systems within the same time frame. In the audience, Captain Tony Walker was taking notes while simultaneously managing trade negotiations with 6 different species via his communicator. His unofficial diplomatic missions had become so successful that he'd been promoted to Director of Interspecies Commerce, a position that made him one of the most powerful humans in the galaxy. The Andromedan Trade Confederation wants to establish formal relations, Tony whispered to Ambassador Susan Rodriguez, who sat beside him. Apparently, word about our success has spread to other galaxies. Susan nodded, making a note on her own tablet. As Director of Alliance Foreign Relations, she now managed diplomatic contact with over 300 different species. It was challenging work, but she approached it with the same methodical professionalism she'd once brought to UN negotiations. Back on the Eternal Dominion, Admiral Beth was receiving a priority communication from Alliance intelligence. The speaker was Colonel Rick Santos, who had somehow become the galaxy's most effective intelligence coordinator, despite never leaving Earth's solar system. "Beth, we've got an interesting situation developing in the Vega sector," Rick reported. "The hegemony of Thalmar is threatening the peaceful union of Kepler. Classic conquest scenario, overwhelming military force versus diplomatic species." "Sounds familiar," Beth replied dryly. "What's our response?" "The Kepler Union has requested Alliance assistance. I'm thinking we send a diplomatic mission with some technical advisors to demonstrate alternative conflict resolution methods." Beth pulled up the tactical display showing the Thalmar fleet positioning for invasion. "How overwhelming are we talking?" "Their military could glass the Kepler worlds in about 6 hours. Classic case of technological superiority being used for bullying rather than problem solving." "All right, I'll take a small task force to the Vega sector. Nothing threatening, just a routine diplomatic mission with some very advanced ships crewed by very competent people." 3 days later, the hegemony of Thalmar discovered what the Zeltharians had learned 6 months earlier. Threatening people who weren't impressed by threats was more complicated than expected. Admiral Beth's task force arrived in the middle of the Thalmar invasion fleet, not to fight but to offer an alternative perspective on interspecies relations. Within 12 hours, she was hosting a conference call between Thalmar leadership and Kepler representatives, facilitating discussions about trade partnerships and mutual defense agreements. The Thalmar invasion was quietly canceled when their military analysts realized that joining the Alliance would give them access to human-enhanced technology that was superior to anything they could capture through conquest. Back on Earth, Dr. Amy Foster was coordinating the galaxy's first interspecies environmental restoration project. The Alliance had agreed to help terraform dead worlds throughout known space, using a combination of human ecological knowledge, Corvani biotechnology, and Zeltharian industrial capabilities. The interesting thing about working with aliens, Amy explained to her research team, is that they bring completely different perspectives to environmental problems. The Velthar have techniques for atmospheric modification that we never would have thought of. Her current project involved restoring the homeworld of the Silthek, a species whose planet had been strip-mined by a previous imperial regime. Using Alliance resources and cooperative effort from 12 different species, they expected to have a functioning biosphere within 5 years. In the Alliance Council chambers, the daily administrative meeting was wrapping up. Representatives from 47 different species had spent the morning discussing trade disputes, territorial boundaries, and resource allocation with the same bureaucratic efficiency humans brought to any large organization. Former War Minister, Vexandra, who now served as Alliance Military Coordinator, stood to deliver her report. "I'm pleased to announce that military expenditures are down 68% from pre-Alliance levels, while territorial security has improved dramatically. Voluntary cooperation is proving significantly more cost-effective than occupation enforcement." The meeting concluded with a presentation from the newest member species, a group of aquatic beings from the Procyon system, who had specifically requested to join after hearing about the Alliance's reasonable administrative overhead and sensible policies. As the representatives filed out, Thexmarin approached Ambassador Rodriguez with something that might have been confusion. "Ambassador, I must ask you something that has been troubling me," the former Supreme Overlord said. 6 months ago, my empire controlled 12 star systems through military force. Today, the Alliance includes over 50 systems, all voluntary members. How did your species accomplish this?" Susan considered the question seriously. "We didn't accomplish anything, really. We just treated galactic politics like any other administrative challenge. Good organization, clear communication, mutually beneficial agreements. The same principles work whether you're managing a city council or a galactic federation. And if we had refused your suggestions, then you would have refused them. We're not conquerors, Ambassador Thexmarin. We're problem solvers. The galaxy had problems, we offered solutions. It's not complicated. Thexamaran looked out through the observation windows at the fleet of ships representing dozens of species, all working together under human-optimized organizational principles. "Your species is very strange," he said finally. "So we've been told," Susan replied with a smile. In the distance, the communication array was receiving a priority signal from outside the galaxy. Another alien empire, in another spiral arm, was sending threatening messages to a peaceful species that had recently made contact with the Alliance. The response was already being prepared. A small diplomatic mission,